On August 18, 1992, police in Somerville, Texas, arrived to the scene of a house on fire. The remains of 6 bodies were found inside. Investigators quickly discovered that the home was set alight after a mass murder. Among those killed were a mother, grandmother, and 4 young children. The youngest just 4 years old. Their attacker or attackers had bludgeoned, shot, and stabbed them repeatedly. The prime suspect was the father of one of the murdered children, Robert Carter. This is him attending his son's funeral, with bandages covering burns on his hand and face. During interrogation, Carter confessed to the crime. Under pressure from investigators who were convinced he couldn't have done it alone, Carter accused his wife's first cousin, Anthony Graves, of being an accomplice. But the investigation into Graves was botched at every stage. The prosecution exaggerated weak evidence against Graves and ignored red flags that Carter was lying. Even Graves' defense at trial failed to call on key witnesses to corroborate his alibi. In 1994, Graves was convicted and sentenced to death. He would spend 18 years of his life imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. Much of it on death row, awaiting execution. His case only reopened years later after a group of journalism students revealed the gaping holes in the evidence against him. On October 27, 2010, the charges against Graves were dropped before a retrial even started, bringing his nightmare to an end. On this episode of The InnerView, I'll speak to Anthony Graves about his life on death row and his difficult journey to justice and forgiveness. I've been following this story for more than a decade. I've looked deeply into it. I've interviewed Anthony Graves before, and every single time that I do, it becomes more unbelievable. It's an extraordinary story, and I'm delighted to tell you that Anthony Graves joins us now on The InnerView. Anthony, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, sir. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much. 18 and a half years incarcerated, on death row for almost 2 decades, in solitary confinement for a long, long time for a crime that you did not commit. What does justice mean to you when you look back at the injustice against you?
Wow, that's an important question. It's true that I've gone through hell with the justice system here in the United States. Justice to me means admitting when we get it wrong and working to fix those things so that it doesn't happen again. Justice to me means educating our community about our criminal justice system so that we can be better informed and we can make more informed decisions around it. Because when we're able to do that, we're able to save time and save lives. So justice to me is just all of us joining our hands and putting our heads down and making sure that we are building the best system so that we don't destroy families. Justice to me is peace and freedom. That's what justice is.
There were many victims in this crime. Bobby Davis and her family, the grandma, her daughter, those innocent children. I was doing the numbers, and I think one of the kids would be in their 40s now, the rest in their mid-30s now. Those children robbed of their lives, and you were a victim as well, an innocent man fingered by Robert Carter. When you look back and you think about Robert Carter and why he named you and why he fingered you, he was executed, more than 2 decades ago. Do you forgive him?
Yeah, I forgive him, and I will never forget what he did to me, but I forgive him because it was bigger than him. He shouldn't have been allowed to do that to me anyway. A young man who didn't even really know me just called my name and it interrupted my entire life. That should not be the way our system is set up and designed to operate. Robert Carter shouldn't have been able to just lie on me and then take my freedom just like that. So for that, it was just it's a bigger picture, right? It's me understanding that it wasn't even just about me. It was about a criminal justice system that is becoming criminal, and I needed to be exposed to it so that I can dedicate my life to making it better. So it was easy for me to forgive once I understood that it really is not about me. It's really about a whole criminal justice system that is criminal on its face, and I needed to be exposed to it. So
What's criminal about it?
the practice itself, the fact that we as human beings think that we have built something infallible to the point where we can now make judgments on people's lives, whether they should live or die. How stupid are we to think that we can create a system of justice by man and that it would always be an infallible system? The system is broken. It is broken. It is broken. It is broken, and it's taking lives of people who are broken. So the system is designed to prey on broken people. So yeah, it's a lot of things that are wrong with the criminal justice system. It is a system that was designed when black men in America didn't even have rights, and it's still practiced that way. It is a system that needs to be thrown out with the bathwater and rebuilt for the 21st century. We haven't caught up with the 21st century yet when it comes to our criminal justice system. So we got a lot of work to do, and I've dedicated my life to making sure that the work get done.
The Marshall Project released something very recently to show that the situation is still bad. The prisons are not in great condition. There are a lot of unnecessary deaths, suicides, a lot of abuse taking place in the prisons. Does it disappoint you? Does it depress you to know that all these years later, even though you're fighting against this system and trying to reform the system, make it better, and so many people are now being apologized to for having been unfairly stitched up by the system who are on death row? I don't know, more than 160 people. I stand corrected, but it's a big number. Despite all of that, the system's not good enough. Does that frustrate you?
Yeah, it's very frustrating, man, because, people, politicians in particular, put their finger up in the air and just depend on which way the wind blowing is the way they talk about it. But the fact is we have a big problem with our criminal justice system. We've allowed our criminal justice system to become criminal. And it's very frustrating that we make excuses for criminals. And that is our system. We're making an excuse all the time for the system. And yet we have evidence that prove that we do not always get it right, that the system does get it wrong. I lost 18 and a half years of my life because the system got it wrong. I was almost executed twice because the system got it wrong. So, yeah, the system has become very criminal because we have decided that it is more important to convict people than it is to seek justice. And that has caused our criminal system to become the criminal that it is now.
You believe the system is corrupt and broken and wrong and criminal. There are those who defend the system who believe that there are just some bad actors within that system, some rotten apples within that system, like the prosecutor in your case, Charles Sebesta, a gung-ho prosecutor who tried to throw anything that would stick against you. How much of it was just the fact that Sebesta was a really bad prosecutor who ended up being disbarred? So in that sense, even though he was already retired, he failed at his job, he destroyed people's lives, yes, but the system kicked him out belatedly, but there was still enough in that system to show that it could correct itself. Are you partial to that argument at all?
Well, I mean, and the way I see it is that regardless of the bad actors, there should be guardrails in place so they don't get to act bad. And that's the problem. We don't have guardrails in place for bad actors. Everybody just make things up on the go and then circumvent it along the way. We need a system that have guardrails in place that keep people from practicing their biases. We do not have that. We take it for granted that people are going to be professional in their profession. And it's not the case. People are human beings. They have their own biases, conscious and unconscious. And we do not have the guardrails in place to protect people against their own biases. And that is a big problem with our criminal justice system, is we're just dependent on people to do the right thing. And people are not going to always do the right thing. There are too many incentives for them to do whatever they can to win, such as getting a promotion to becoming a judge from a prosecutor, should you have such a stellar record of convictions. There are too many incentives in place that mislead and misguide us in our practice. So I think that the problem is that there need to be more guardrails. For example, when it comes to the death penalty, one man shouldn't decide alone whether or not to seek the death penalty. There should be a panel. He should have to take the evidence in front of that panel. Panel should weigh that evidence and determine whether or not this case justifies seeking death. There's nothing there. You just decide. A prosecutor who's biased, who's racist, can decide he's going to kill a black man and use his position to do so, which happened in my case.
There are a couple of things that we're going to do in the YouTube description. We're going to put some links that point to the actual details of your case and the history. So if anybody wants to look at those, they can. And also some of the work that you're doing in order to try and bring about some more guardrails and some more checks and balances to the system. So I encourage the viewers to sort of click below and have a look. But I want to talk a little bit about those 18 and a half years now, because not only were you accused of homicide, it wasn't quite the kind of accusation where they said, well, this guy is a suspect because he was in an argument with another guy and he pulled out a gun and he killed him and they were both drunk or something. It wasn't that. It was that you were a baby killer, that you stabbed innocent babies to death more than 60 times, and you killed a grandma, and you were involved in the killing of a 16-year-old, and you set the house on fire afterwards to conceal the evidence. Tell me about what it felt like to know that a lot of people believed that not only were you a killer, you were a baby stabber, you were that type of killer. Tell me about how that felt.
Wow. Yeah, that was a heavy cross to bear. I had to grow thick skin, because here it is. I'm totally innocent. I've never harmed anyone in my life. I don't have that kind of record. That's not my history. But yet to have to live for almost 2 decades with someone believing that I could have killed babies, women, children. That was hard. But what was even harder was whoever had done it got to enjoy the suffering of an innocent person while they were putting me through this. Someone else who had actually done this crime was still free. But then I couldn't focus on that. I couldn't focus what the world was trying to accuse me of, what they had convicted me of, what they labeled me as. My focus was on making sure that whether I came home in a pine box or I came home standing, that the world was going to know what was happening to me, that the world was going to know that our criminal justice system is not the criminal and that we need to change that. The world was going to know Anthony Graves. I was going to make sure of that. So it was because of my mother, it was because of my children. I did not want the world to see me as something I wasn't. My mother did not raise a murderer. She did not raise a baby killer. My children didn't have a father who was a baby killer. My children were babies at that time. So it was just really hard that, I was convicted, wrongfully convicted of something like that. But it made me more determined than ever to fight for justice. And then from there, it just gave me a purpose greater than myself, that I don't want to see anyone else go through something like this. So it's why now I've dedicated my life to doing the work that I do today, which is fight for criminal justice reform.
You said that the feeling that somebody else who was involved was walking free while you were suffering and being blamed for this. So without going too much into the details here. We had Robert Carter go to jail and he was executed for the crime. And one of the reasons why Sebesta believed that you were involved is because the crime scene suggested that it was impossible for one person to have done it, because these innocent people were killed in multiple ways, with a knife and with a gun and with a hammer. So do you still believe there was somebody else involved with him on that day?
Let me just say this. I'm going to be brutally honest here. I don't even believe he did it. I think they just messed this whole case up. I'm just going to be told. I think they executed an innocent man. No one never want me to talk like this, but I can't help it, because I've never believed from day one that a man who had done something like this would have to make up 7, 8 different stories, including himself in it, just for the police, for the investigators to buy his stories. He made up 7 stories in the same night he was arrested, until it fitted it fitted their theory. And then they arrested this man, and then they arrested his wife, and then they let his wife go, and then they made him lie on me, and then they killed him. But during this time, this man had said that he had nothing to do with it. But because they went after his wife, this man said he felt like he was between a rock and a hard place. So he felt that he was going to do the lesser of the 2 evils. He just kept lying on me and himself. But if you ask me my honest opinion, there has been nothing in this case, no evidence whatsoever, that said Robert Carter murdered those people. None. He lied on himself. They made him lie on himself to protect his wife. That man was innocent, and the state of Texas murdered him. And nobody's ever going to say that but his family and people that knew him before. I didn't know him. But nobody ever going to say that, because why? No one wants to grapple with the fact that we executed an innocent man at the hands of a lying prosecutor. That's what actually happened. So I get very emotional about that, because I feel in my heart of hearts that man didn't know anything about it. Because if he did, why did he have to lie on an innocent man? Why did he have to make up stories if he was actually there himself? They arrested that man's wife, and they held that over his head and made that man lie on himself. And at the end of the day, Texas executed an innocent man. And I would always believe that, because I was there in that jury, in that courtroom while they was doing this to me. What makes me think they treated him any way different? They lied on that man like they lied on me.
Okay, that's interesting. And again, I don't want to get into the details, right? The issues of him appearing at the funeral, and one of those people at the funeral was his own kid, his 4-year-old kid, and he had the burns on him and the scars on him and so on. That was used as part of the evidence. There was a dispute over custody and paternity. I don't want to get into that. And of course, he's been executed. It's gone. It's done, right?
Yeah.
But you say they did the same to him that they did to you. So help me unpack this a little bit. He changed his story 7 times, as you said. Sometimes it included you, sometimes it didn't include you. He failed a polygraph, you failed a polygraph. There was coercion, there were threats.
Well, let me back you up before you say that.
Go ahead.
Let me back you up, because make sure your audience understand that lie detector tests are not admissible in court, because they can manipulate a lie detector test. I know that for a fact.
Yeah,
and
that's
I want
part of
people to understand that.
that's part of my question here, is that, so you're saying they put him through what they put you through, which made you question whether he was even guilty here. I remember your star witness, that was your alibi, was your girlfriend at the time, if I'm not mistaken, who they spooked just before she was about to testify by suggesting that she was also a suspect, so she didn't show up. So all of these things that were done by Sebesta and others, were there times that you felt you were just going to cave and cut a deal, or you were just going to admit to it because you were bombarded by all of this? Give me some insight into what they were actually doing to you.
Listen, man, it was the good cop, bad cop game that played with me. It was the lying, it was the manipulation, it was just the interrogation. It was keeping me in a cell against my will. It was telling me they're going to kill me over and over and over, trying to get me to cut some deal with them for something I did not do or didn't know anything about, I just couldn't go there. That you was going to kill me or free me. I was not going to compromise the truth. And that was just my mindset from the minute you put me in custody for something I didn't know anything about. I was not going to cave and just give you my life for something I didn't do. That was just who I was, and I was willing to die for that.
What was solitary like?
Hell. It was hell. Whatever you picture hell to be, that was hell for me every day for 18 and a half years, 6,640 days of my life for a crime I knew absolutely nothing about.
And what's freedom like?
Freedom is a state of mind. It is never giving up. It is living your best life despite the circumstance. It is knowing that you have choices in your life and that regardless of an act, it is up to you how you respond to it, and understanding that gives you freedom to choose. So freedom to me is just being able to choose what I want to do with my life. Point blank. That's true freedom.
Anthony, I asked you if you forgave Robert Carter, who blamed you and said you were his accomplice in this horrific mass murder. Do you forgive Charles Sebesta, the prosecutor?
That's hard. That's hard because Charles Sebesta knew exactly what he was doing. Charles Sebesta knew that he was sentencing and convicting an innocent young black man, and he had no problem with that. Charles Sebesta knew that he was trying to kill an innocent black man, and he had no problem with that. But at the end of the day, I'm God's child, and I've forgiven Charles Sebesta. I even shook his hand when we was at the court. I shook his hand and told him no hard feelings because that was my closure. That was for me. But I'll never forget what Charles Sebesta did to me and my family. And only thing I can say is that God bless him and his. I hope he was able to enjoy them while he took me away from mine. No, I cannot just straight up say I forgive Charles Sebesta and not cringe at it, but I have to because I'm God's child.
Even when you were set free, he stood firm. He even took out full-page ads in the newspapers trying to prove your guilt. Did that anger you?
No. At that time, the whole situation was bigger than me. It was about exposing the criminal justice system that had gone off the rail. It was no longer about Charles Sebesta. Charles Sebesta was trying to save face for himself. That had nothing to do with me. That was all about him. And you see how that turned out. He was disbarred. Could never practice law again. He has a tarnished reputation. Everybody knows him to be a rogue prosecutor now. So Charles Sebesta has to deal with Charles Sebesta. I don't think one day about Charles Sebesta. Like I say, when I had to forgive him, I cringed, but I did it because I'm God's child. But Charles Sebesta's, in hindsight, I would have to thank Charles Sebesta in a way, because Charles Sebesta, in his callousness about my life or toward my life, his lying, his cheating, his unethical professional ways, put me on the path, man. Gave me a purpose greater than myself, and now I help people. I got after Dwayne Brown off of death row. I used my story to help get him off of death row. He was an innocent man. I've stopped men from getting executed, stay of execution, because I've been involved with their case. I've created a whole nonprofit. I've created an organization helping men who are formerly incarcerated coming back out and training them how to go back and mentor other men and their families. So Charles Sebesta, in hindsight, gave me a blessing greater than something that I never seen in my life. So I can be upset with him all day, every day for what he did. But had I not gone to this school of hard knocks, I wouldn't be out here doing the work that I do today. So, I mean, it all works out.
The death penalty itself, is there a place for it?
No, and it's not so much because I just think it's bad. I mean, to each his own. But I sat in them cheap seats. They tried to execute me twice, and I was totally innocent. Wasn't even in the same town that the crime happened in. Had alibi witnesses, and yet I was still facing the death penalty. And they was trying to still execute me. So we know now almost 200 men that have come off of death row around our country. Just imagine if we actually executed them. We would now know today that we would have executed almost 200 innocent men. So is it worth it? The collateral damage, the human suffering, the human capital, is it worth it? And then we still get it wrong? I don't think so. And anyone who has looked at it from that perspective, whether you believe in it or not, will realize it just doesn't work. I always say to people, quit asking, does the death penalty work? It shouldn't matter. I mean, quit asking, do you believe in the death penalty? It shouldn't matter. That's between you and your God. The question should be, does the death penalty work? And almost 200 men have come home from being on death row as innocent men. Answer that question. Does it work?
Anthony Graves, you have an extraordinary story and you are an unbelievable human being. Thank you very much for joining us on the interview.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
All the best.
Have a blessed one.
You too.